Starting and up, we are live. Hello and welcome to the More Freedom Foundation's live programming. Today we're going to be discussing Switzerland. It's a model that I have long found fascinating, specifically its emphasis on local governance rather than governments from the center, and sort of how that all works and interacts. Today, I am lucky enough to be speaking with Quentin Adler, an old friend of mine and a longtime supporter of the channel. He was actually there when we filmed the FATCA video 3 years ago that convinced me I should try to do this full time. So Quentin has been in on the ground floor. And he's also got a unique perspective on Swiss politics. Quentin is an attorney and a Swiss political activist. Chiefly his work is through his association, the Service Citoyen. Apologies, Quentin, if I massacred that, which focuses on reforming the system of service that the government requires of all Swiss people. But Quentin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So it's a pleasure for me to be on your show. Actually, yeah, you bring back memories by thinking of that time we were together in Istanbul. That was quite interesting. So I was born in Geneva. Now I currently live there. I've done my military duty as a sergeant in Bern, so in the capital of Switzerland, at least the Canton. Then I studied at the bilingual Canton of Fribourg, which is in the middle of Switzerland. It speaks both German and French. Done a semester in the UK, in London. Then I moved one semester in Istanbul. Done my traineeship at Baker McKenzie. I passed the bar exam in Geneva, Baker McKenzie, Geneva, and now I'm working for a small boutique law firm called Brown & Page, mainly specialized in alternative dispute resolution and international arbitration, and we also have a sort of minor specialty in energy and environmental law. So that's it for, so to speak, my background. If we talk about politics, after the military, participated to a campaign. This was a historical occasion in Geneva. Now, after that, we're going to talk about the difference between cantons and confederation. But so Geneva is one of the 26 cantons of Switzerland, and there we had an historical occasion to change the constitution, and it was a people's assembly that.
This is changing Geneva's constitution.
Exactly. So we had to elect a people's assembly to do that, and I had an occasion to join the show, and so I did, because it's something that does not happen that often. I don't know.
So what was the aspect of the constitution that was being changed? This was related.
Everything from scratch. So it's really, new constitution in Geneva. So that was the purpose.
In what year was this?
2008.
Huh.
Yeah.
So Geneva got a completely new constitution.
Absolutely. But then came the reality of what politics is, even in Switzerland. So it was not so innovative as it could have been. And I've not been elected. That being said, that's for sure.
You were not elected to the People's Assembly.
No, I was not. And it was kind of not a disappointment on a personal level, because I had not high expectation, but to realize that the people that that actually decided that new constitution had an average age of, I don't know, it was like 54 or something like that, to decide of Geneva's future was not so exciting. And most of them, they were like retired politicians who went back on stage, seizing that last opportunity of their career to basically impose the agenda and use their networks for the last time.
Interesting. I think I'll pause you there. Just a couple things worth highlighting. It's that Switzerland is a multilingual country. There's, I believe, 4 languages spoken in Switzerland. Perhaps the predominantly, correct me if I'm wrong, German, French, and then there are smaller Italian and Romansh populations. Do the cantons, so there's 26 cantons, do those break down, like a canton will either be German or French or Italian, or are there mixes within the cantons?
Exactly. That's one of the things you will find in a cantonal constitution, would be, for instance, what is the state language? And there are only actually 4 cantons which are multilingual, and 2 of them, I think it's German and French, German and French, German and French, and the last one is German and Italian, and Romansh as well, as you mentioned. But there is one thing to understand as well. We have 4 national languages, and I find it to be particularly interesting speaking to someone from the US, because we have 4 national languages, but we have 3 official languages, which means the last one, Romansh, is actually a protected language, a sort of native language from Switzerland that we protect. And if you are a native speaker from that language, then you are allowed to communicate with the federal authority in that language. But as such, beyond that, we do not, for instance, have our legislation translated in that language. If you understand what I mean.
So I think that's one thing worth highlighting about Switzerland, and one of the I would say many reasons why Switzerland is so impressive is that we hear a lot, especially in coverage in certain regions, about how, oh, you can never expect people of different cultures to work together in a government. I think in discussions even of not just in the developing world, but I think in discussions of Belgium today, I think that interpretation is becoming more popular. And Switzerland it proves that isn't so.
It's a good counterexample of that. Absolutely. And we say something about our country. We call it a Willensnation. That means a nation of the will. It means that we decided to gather together, and it's not that something happened in history that puts us together like having a sort of unifying power that came over us, although it's not all true. But and this is another interesting aspect of Switzerland, I believe, is that our core beliefs are based on a mythology. It's not necessarily like some historical facts or some pride of a glorious past that we had, and
the Swiss national blood, or nothing like that.
Yeah, no, it's not something like that. It's actually a mythology that we have, and if you want to go, actually, we could already start on the history part of it. But what we call to be our sort of primary constitution. It comes back to 1291, and this is called the Rütli Hof, also called the Federal Charter, and it's actually only between the 3 primary cantons of Switzerland, so Uri, Schwyz, Unterwald. And this was factually a military alliance against imperialistic powers that you had around, especially the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Was it Habsburgs back then yet, or
exactly? And so it comes back to that, but at the same time, it's something quite minor. It's not like it was not even a republic or something. It's a cooperation agreement on certain aspects, mostly military, but also how could we discuss with one another, what kind of respect and trust we should have, and such things. And this is very important. Yes,
that's one of the fascinating things about Switzerland. It's just the sort of the way that it has evolved over time. I feel like in the United States, we're vaguely aware of Switzerland. We sort of only become aware of it if some scandal related to banking comes up or something along those lines, and then people who've had some exposure to the country mostly are aware that it's very nice and a little bit boring and very expensive. But what I find fascinating about Switzerland is the way that the system has evolved and the way that the system seems to be much more locally organized rather than on a federal level, and how that has led to a range of positive effects. The ability to have a multilingual country successfully, the high level of development that Switzerland has achieved. I mean, it's not, I think some of the initial comments I was getting, it's sort of talking about how, oh, well, you know, any country can be successful if they, you know, if they're a banking haven or what have you. Well, I mean, there are a lot of banking havens out there, and I don't know that. I mean, while I of course have warm feelings for Panama and the Cayman Islands, I don't think they've quite managed what Switzerland has achieved.
There are lots of different aspects in what you say, but I'll catch on the first one. You say a boring place. It is as it is seen, and actually, I will. Truth be told, it's actually the case, and maybe it is why it is working. Because no, but seriously, think about that. The fact of having always fancy policies, not saying policies, but politics. You know, having a public debate going around a colored personality that takes over the power and stuff like that. It's actually, it consumes a lot of energy in the country.
You mean a colorful personality like Trump? You're speaking.
For instance, yeah, but you could find many other examples in other countries. But the fact that actually it's a kind of boring system, meaning that you don't have much of strong personalities ruling the show in Switzerland. I personally don't even know, and most of the Swiss will be in the same position as I don't even know the name of each of my prime ministers, which would actually be the equivalent of the president in the United States.
And you guys have, is it 7 prime ministers at any time? It's not a single individual. It's a council that occupies the executive position.
Absolutely. So we call it the Federal Council of 7 prime ministers, so to speak, and they have to decide all together as one if they want to make a decision like a president would. We also have a president among them, but it's more of a representative figure for the rest of the world to understand, and for the council itself to have someone to lead the discussions. But it does not have any extra powers beyond that.
And they only serve for a year or so, right?
Sorry?
And they only serve for a year at a time or something like that.
Exactly. And exactly. So I understand it. But what I would like also to point out, because you asked me last time, another time we talked together, you asked me, what could you actually learn from the Swiss model? And I think this is one of the key, is we do not elect our executive body. Not us directly, the people. This is the parliament. Exactly. It is the parliament that does that election. So,
but you do not. So you do not elect your is there an executive body at the canton level? Is there an executive position?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
That directly elected or no?
In most cantons, yes, we do elect directly our executive body, but at the federal level, this is not the case. And so this is what is highly interesting, because we do not have probably the best leaders, but we do have, I'm talking about the federal level, we probably do have the most consensual ones, because the ones that are able to talk with each other political
the most consensus based. The best consensus based. The most consensus.
Yes, exactly.
So I think so just one more thing about sort of Swiss boredom or what have you. That's a tremendous privilege. I mean, it's extraordinary to perhaps that gets to the consensus-based model. Perhaps that gets to a certain, which I think also leads to a certain slowness in getting things done. But to have a country where everything just sort of goes okay generally is a tremendous privilege, and you don't just sort of happen into that. You don't luck into that. As you'd pointed out, I think Switzerland has a tremendously fraught history with very aggressive neighborhoods. Sorry, very aggressive neighbors, from the Habsburgs to Napoleon to.
Absolutely. If you think about that, we are in the middle of Europe. Mm-hmm. Our neighboring countries are Germany, France, Italy, and back in the day, the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Yeah.
So those were huge powers. Sometimes I even wonder, how did we figure out to survive all that long, you know? Because seriously, if you think about that, all those countries had imperialistic views and history. So it's sort of a miracle that we survived today.
Exactly. So the boredom of Switzerland is miraculous, is what it is. The fact that, and I mean, there's some of that is geography, of course. I think that the Alpine location allowed Switzerland to exist in some ways, but there are other. I mean, Afghanistan has a lot of mountains too. You know, I think there's also a lot to be said for the system that has developed over time.
Yeah, well, we do have one thing that most of the people forget, because often you can hear that people say, actually Switzerland has no natural resources, but it's actually wrong. We do have the most important one. We do have water, and we have 5% of still water of all Europe.
Oh, interesting.
So this is really a key for our development, because we do not have, or we never had to fight for the primary resource of life, actually.
Well, that is certainly important. That is certainly important. So,
at the same time, as you mentioned, the fact that we have all these mountains and sort of, how would I call it, but not the proper conditions to have a rich agriculture or to be of real interest in terms of resource, apart from water. But for a long time, you could not export water as we can do nowadays. The fact that we had that sort of arid, do you say so, arid environment, made the country a less interesting place for all those powers. And at the same time, you had a population that was living in the mountains, so living the tough life. I mean, if you're a mountain farmer, you cannot imagine what it is as a lifestyle and how tough you have to be to go through the year, especially if you think of the harsh winter that you have to face each year as well. So all those conditions meant that we had strong men as well, and one of the other reasons we survived that long, although being surrounded by imperialistic powers, is that at a certain point in our history, it was 1515, after we have been defeated by the French. It was always like the only nation we fail against. But anyway, after we lost to the French, so we decided to stay neutral and not to expand any longer. So to renounce any kind of imperialistic views on the world, and at that time, what we did is we sold our men. So we had that mercenary resistance that kept us going for almost 500 years. And this was a very important source of income for us as well.
Of course. Let's get into the actual system and how it works. So, as you've mentioned, each canton has its own political system, has its own constitution. So what powers are held by the federal government? What does the actual federal government handle?
Yes. So I read a comment from Richard Baker. He says Switzerland as a model for the EU, and this is exactly what I think. Because if you go on that topic, something that most of the big countries in Europe fail to understand is that a federal government does not mean that the central government grants power to the region.
Exactly.
It's actually the
and I think that's a big problem with Brussels is that
absolutely.
there was, I mean, the EU, as I think we've discussed before, I see the EU as a potentially a tremendous force for peace. But if you're in Brussels deciding the food and the food regulations and the regulations for absolutely everything for everybody living from Croatia to northern England, then you've got problems, and you're going to foster resentment. So it's quite possible that, as Richard Baker says, that Switzerland provides a better model. So what does the federal government?
So exactly, going to the point. So we do have a principle, very important if you want to have a federal state, in my opinion, is what we call subsidiarity principle. It means anything that is not granted expressly to the central state is then left to the cantons. So you have to provide in the constitution what are the tasks of the federal government, and what is not in there, then the cantons are free to dispose of it, so to speak. Well,
we have a similar system in the United States. I believe it's sort of the 10th Amendment. Okay, that may not be a direct analog at all, but at least in principle, the idea is that states should be controlling the majority of what goes on. I think that's still the case, but I think over the past 100 years, we've seen a lot of that break down. I think that more and more powers get transferred to the federal government in Washington, D.C. Is there a similar trajectory?
Yes, there is a similar trend in Switzerland as well. Yeah, unfortunately, there is a similar trend. But I would say that it is not all lost, because at the same time, due to the people's power that we have through referendum and popular initiative, and the culture that we have, this is still something in the public debates that remains. So what is to be ruled by the Confederation, what has to be decided by the cantons, it is always something that is discussed. So although, as you mentioned, we do have that trend towards more centralization, there is still this idea still remaining. So I will say, in a way, the federal structure is not just a fiction. But this is true. We are getting more and more centralized. To give you a simple example, right from my field of action is, for instance, the code of procedure. I would say 5 years ago, you had civil procedure and criminal procedure were all ruled by cantonal states, and now it has been unified at the federal level. So we do share common rules.
Oh, that's interesting. So
yes.
was that sort of consent based, or was that the federal government said, okay, now you all have to follow the same civil procedure?
This is the interesting part of it, because you could say this is the central government decided so, but if you go to how the system works in Switzerland, we always have a right to oppose Parliament's decision. So a legislation. So if we wanted something to be different, we could have voted against it. But no, so it's consent based at the end, and it kind of makes sense, because personally I don't see it as a regression. We could discuss it, but at the same time it's sort of more optimal to have the same rules that apply everywhere in the country regarding judiciary proceedings in Switzerland. Back in the day, if you were a lawyer in Geneva, then you could only practice in that canton. Now I could go to any other cantons in Switzerland. So it's less resources that are invested, for instance, in getting legal services, because you can imagine.
That's very interesting. So then in Switzerland now, there's if you've got a uniform civil procedure law, it's Richard Baker here is also talking about zoning. If you've got uniform zoning law, and if attorneys can practice in Switzerland is actually now more integrated than the United States is, because in the United States, you're only registered.
Yes.
You have to register as an attorney in each individual state. Zoning is
Oh,
very local, as is
yeah.
civil procedure. Well, civil procedure, there's some oversight, but the actual statutes are all local. So that's interesting. I did not realize that.
Yeah, sure. But at the same time, the US is a bigger country as well. So it's kind of normal to not try to unify each and every piece of legislation, I guess.
Yes.
It makes more sense to have a specific code of procedure, either criminal or civil. I don't know, in Florida, comparison to California, than from Geneva to Canton de Vaud, which is actually 500,000 and 500,000 in terms of population.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's it's kind of it's probably more unified than the US, and probably on other aspects it will be less. I don't know, but I can imagine that maybe we do have more localism as well in Switzerland that you could find in the US. Because, for instance, I said there are actually 3 levels of power. So you have the federal level, cantonal level, but the municipality level is still something which is important in Switzerland. And on each of these levels, and maybe this is what is even more interesting, is actually this direct democracy aspect. At each of this level, the people have the right to either suggest or oppose a legislation.
Well, I think that's interesting, because I do think there is a natural trend towards I don't know if homogenization or whatever. I do think that within a given political entity, just through the function of time, things are going to get a little more uniform and a little bit more the same. And whereas, well, in Switzerland, I think has been functioning, it's had the same constitution since 1848. There's sort of broad equality. So, well, it's also an unequal country, but it's vastly more equal than the United States is. And it's a sort of smaller population. There's been a general sense of agreement on how things should work for quite some time. So I think it's natural that there would be more harmonization. The question is that consent-based approach, is that local power preserved? And if it is, then I don't have much of an issue with harmonization.
So you're probably right. I feel, but actually, I think that trend towards what do you call that, homogenization, is actually something that goes broader. If you think about globalism in general, this is, for me, it's a fact of nature. It's sort of a natural tendency that we have, because at the same time we are the same species. For sure, cultural boundaries made some sense at certain point of history, but now, I mean, look at us. I mean, we're having a live talk. You are in the US, I'm in Switzerland, and we are able to discuss and share views so what difference does it make? Of course, you have factors that have to remain local, but at the same time, I guess that on the other side, it's kind of normal to have more homogenization in general, and it's not unhealthy in itself. This is what I believe, but it depends for what. Because for me, I see both sides of the coin. So on the one side, I'm more in favor of regionalism on the one side and sort of globalism on the other. And if you fail to respect actually either of them, I guess you're doing something wrong.
Well, you're going to have problems, and I think I definitely trend towards regionalism, more local power. But that doesn't mean that I'm anti-globalism or anti a global system. It's just that we just have to be very, very careful in the ways that it evolves. You can't do what Brussels did, which was just sort of say, oh, okay, we've accomplished this, and we're going to start issuing diktats. You can't do that, because it gets backlash. And I think the macro trend is towards more globalization, more, I personally would never want to see a one world government in my lifetime, but 500 years from now, that sort of thing could actually evolve.
Mhm.
Could
And
evolve
but the
as
real
long as
and
local
the real and the
institutions
uh,
are respected.
yeah, and the real question for me is not so much whether we have a centralized power or not. It's what kind of power do we have? Because if you have verticality or horizontality in the kind of decision-making process, this is a huge difference. This is actually the thing that matters to me. Not
Mhm.
so much whether it is at I don't know if you understand my point, but what I'm trying to say is how far can the central government decide without the ground-based, or how do you call that, the ground-based population.
Mhm.
And something interesting, Richard Baker pointed out, and this is true. This is the federal level. Actually, at the federal level, the tax are the lowest in comparison to the rest of the country.
I
So
I want to. I think it would be useful if we could. So you had been involved in helping, or at least we're trying to be involved in helping to set the new Geneva Constitution. So
yeah.
what aspects does that document deal with? What does the Geneva government handle? Like I mean, is it social provision? Is it what does
Mhm.
uh, so what is the remit of Geneva? What does
Well, it's not so different from the other cantons, I would say. But if you
well of any
if,
country?
if you if you if you if you base yourself on the civil law perspective, we do have these three aspects of it. So criminal law, civil law, and administrative law, public law. So the cantons, they are fully autonomous when it goes to public policies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there are very, very, very few federal limitations on that. And sort of they can extend it sometimes.
So for example,
What we say is sometimes overlapping civil law, for instance, because if you want to regulate, I don't know, the sale of alcohol in a canton, then at the same time you sort of infringing freedom of trade and sort of civil law aspects of it, because it was about contra and economic freedom. But at the same time, you could do that if you do have a political interested agenda that will serve the public.
So
You could do that at the cantonal level.
So how does health provision work in Switzerland? Because it is to some degree, I think healthcare is a right in Switzerland, more or less.
More or less. That's one of the gray areas of Switzerland. Honestly, I would not recommend other countries to adopt our healthcare system.
No.
Because it's basically you have to get an insurance.
Mm-hmm.
This is what is mandatory. But then this insurance, miraculously, they are private entities.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is
so it's like Obamacare.
Sort of, actually, yes. I think Obamacare has been very much inspired from the Swiss model, and this is not, in my opinion, for the best. I'm not saying I know which system is the best, but for me, we should either have a real centralized healthcare. You pay your taxes, and then you have a free healthcare, or pick the other option and say basically you have no mandatory insurance and everyone for its own.
So that's interesting. So as far as where tax money goes in Switzerland, there's limited tax money goes towards healthcare because it's all supposedly private?
But it's no tax money, actually. It's no tax money. It's basically my premium, my insurance premium. I have to sign a contract with an insurance company, and then I will pay what I owe them with regard to this contract.
And what about
yeah?
the people who can't afford to pay those premiums?
Then the cantons will provide them social assistance and pay for them. So this is what is totally stupid in my opinion, because we would rather have no mandatory insurance in Switzerland, and then if you can afford to have one, or you have a case of where you need to have healthcare, then directly the cantonal level would pay for it. I don't see why we subsidize private insurance companies in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. This is something I really don't understand.
Okay, but so for those who need to be helped, that happens at the canton level.
Yes, the social protection is at the cantonal level. Yes.
Oh, so
this is actually what makes the difference with Belgium, the country you mentioned prior to this. Because the real problem in Belgium is that actually the central states.
Just a quick review. So Belgium has two separate populations. You've got the more French speaking, and then the more is it Dutch? Is it actually Dutch speaking, or just something that's closer to Dutch? And the country is now in the midst of serious controversy because the two populations are not agreeing on much. Sorry, you were saying.
But it's not a problem to disagree. But the problem is when the main decisions that you have to take are taken at the central level and applies to everybody. Because then suddenly that disagreement is not like, okay, if you want to do something different, then do that, but on your part.
And that's specifically a problem for Belgium right now with social provision.
Exactly. So social protection is at the centralized level. Mm-hmm. So this is exactly the problem, because the Flamand, the Dutch-speaking population, has the feeling to pay for the French-speaking population. And for all the social care that the central state provides to them. Whereas in Switzerland, each canton provides for its own population.
So the
German-speaking part of Switzerland will never have the feeling that they have to pay for, let's be a little bit, but for the lazy population of the French-speaking part, because they don't.
Mm-hmm. Are there poorer Swiss cantons? I mean, are there?
Yes, this is an interesting factor as well. Yes, we have poor cantons, and this is another very, very interesting thing for the EU, for instance, because I hear a lot, and this is something that is quite normal coming from a country with a centralized power mentality, is to think we should unify taxation all over the country or the respective economic area. Whereas in Switzerland, we do have, this is kind of complicated, and I don't know what would be the English technical term for it, but we call it péréquation, which is basically a sort of balancing between the cantons. And so you have different factors.
It's redistribution. We do it in the United States as well. Certain poorer states get a larger chunk of federal money. Richer states pay in more. So.
Exactly, but it's not just a matter whether you are rich or poor. It's also whether it's more complicated to have productive activities in your canton, what kind of population you have, what hypothetical taxation you could have on your population as well. So it's a lot of different factors that comes together.
And it's certainly much more complicated in the United States as well. I mean, it's not very straightforward.
Okay, I didn't know that actually about the U.S., so it's kind of interesting.
Oh, sure. Well, there's a lot of, one of my greatest pet peeves are these tremendously oversimplified stories that you'll often see in sort of the liberal press. They sort of talk about how, well, look at this, there's blue states and red states. The blue states are sort of supposedly more democratic and progressive or what have you. And occasionally you'll get these articles where they're like, well, look at this, the blue states pay in much more money than the red states. And it's tremendous oversimplification. It's basically population density is what they're measuring in those conversations. I think the number one, according to those metrics, the highest paying, biggest contributor to the federal budget is the state of Delaware, which is ridiculous. If you know anything about the state of Delaware, which essentially owes its existence to a turnpike and regulatory arbitrage. It because it has the most corporation-friendly laws in the country. Most corporations have their headquarters there just to take advantage of those laws. So Delaware supposedly is this country that only exists because it takes business from everywhere else. It's supposedly the biggest contributor to the federal budget. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of people who are very invested in oversimplifying that. Another example would be the people who are talking about, well, California should secede. And California is a very important state. You'll often hear that the economy is one of the fifth largest in the I think fifth or sixth largest in the world if it were independent. But of course, what they don't mention when they look at that is the fact that imagining the Southern California economy without the United States military-industrial complex is essentially impossible. It's the defense spending, federal U.S. defense spending built California during World War II and continues to be a big impact. But sorry, we're now running through my pet peeves. We were talking about pork. We were talking about the sort of redistribution between cantons in.
Of wealth, yes. No, so I was just saying that you can have a system of redistribution without having a unified taxation. And I think this is quite important to understand for the European Union, because you have this tendency in Europe to sort of wanting to how do you call that, to not unify, but to have all at the same level and same taxation everywhere. But at the same time, this is sort of a very anti-freedom in a way, I will say, and you don't get much of the benefits of having different microsystems, to go back to regionalism, because then you cannot try and fail. You cannot do that trial and error, which is totally necessary when you want to have efficient public policies. You need to try something at a certain place and then see whether it works or not, and then other places can adopt it, and so can it work?
Laboratories of democracy.
Exactly, laboratories of democracy and public policies, and I think this is very important. This is why I'm so attached to regionalism as well, because the problem then when you have a centralized power is suddenly you unified everything and you have no point of comparison. Actually, this is the problem you have. You cannot compare what could work better or less. Actually,
yeah, it's a tremendous tension.
Yes. But you wanted me to explain you a little bit about the political structure of the federal state?
Yes, that'd be fantastic.
Okay, so I mentioned actually, so we have been, it's very interesting because Switzerland is actually a patchwork of different legal cultures. We have our own as well, but it will be really pretentious to consider that in itself it has been superior to all the add-ons that we receive from other culture, especially the French, the English, and the US. And the German, sorry, and the German for sure. This is the problem. When you live in Geneva, which is seriously the less Swiss canton of Switzerland, you have that tendency sometimes to forget that Switzerland is actually a Germanic country with a minority of Latin-speaking population.
No, because Geneva is a French city primarily, right? It's French-speaking.
Well, yeah, it's French-speaking mostly, and we are totally surrounded by French. Actually, we only have 4.1 kilometers of border with the rest of Switzerland. And I will say this is not only physical, but probably sometimes a little bit in the mind of the population as well. So we have that tendency to forget. And
I know, for example, that you're very invested in French politics. So,
invested? No, it's just you follow that because it's there. Simply, you cannot avoid it. You cannot avoid it when you are in Switzerland, and there is when you are in Geneva, sorry, but and there is a joke that we have, but which actually might be true, is during the day, during the business hours, Geneva is actually more French than it is Swiss, because because of all the French that come and work here in Geneva. And this is like a huge population. We're talking about like hundreds of thousands of workers coming from France to Geneva each day. So we do have all that cultural pressure. I'm not a great fan of it because seriously, I'm well, you know that, but I'm sort of a French skeptic.
Yes.
I believe that they didn't have the faculty to get rid of the imperialistic culture. So they maintain it artificially, although they are not now a middle power in the world. But it's really difficult for them to detach from that past, and which is a shame, because it's a beautiful country with lots of potential.
Yes.
And this is a cultural influence that we do have here in Switzerland due to open borders and among others.
All right, so I knocked you off track. We were talking about the system a bit.
Yes. So I was saying, at the federal level, it's interesting. So because we sort of adopted our own version of the U.S. Constitution with the two chambers. This was something important. So one for the states. I think it's called the Council of States, and the other National Council. So the Council of States, you have a representation for each canton. For what we call the half cantons, you only have one representative, and for the other cantons, you have two representatives in the Council of States. And then in the National Council, this is based on the part of the population that you have in your own canton. So the bigger you are, the more representatives you get. And together, they are called the Unified Federal Assembly, and this is where the magic happens, so to speak. And the parliament elect the judges, the judiciary body, and the executive body in Switzerland.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, both of them. So this is another, to go back to this is, for me, really a key thing, I believe, not to elect your executive body. I've been thinking about that lately, and this is really a major factor, because at the end, what is an executive body?
It should be someone who works for the legislature.
Exactly. So when you take a decision, a political decision, when you decide to go in a political direction and to follow an agenda, this is the task of the parliament, not of the executive body. Actually, we do not wish to have a political agenda at the executive level, and I think this is a huge mistake that we have in modern democracies. Is to believe that you should have any kind of political agenda at the executive level. We ask them, please apply the laws that we have adopted and decided for.
I think it's a worldwide sort of hangover from the last mode of government. I mean, we all I think with a few exceptions, like sort of Saudi Arabia and I guess North Korea. I mean, we have gotten away from actual monarchist approaches. You know, there are very few absolute rulers left, but even in advanced democracies, we like the idea of having one person in charge, and even though that's not, is transparently not the right way to do it. The story of the United States, in a lot of ways, can be told as a constant accumulation of powers in the office of the president versus the Congress that was supposed to have the powers initially. And I think that's a real problem. I think we kind of want a king, even though that's not the right way to do it, and that's not the way that a republic should be set up.
Well, it's probably a fact of the media system as well, because it's easier to personify the power. You have good stories for it, and it makes everybody. Yeah, it makes the task, so-called journalist, simpler actually.
Yes.
Because you have a political figure, you look at him, you can criticize what kind of ties he wears, and you name it,
it makes the job of, but I don't want to just blame the media, because I think it's what the people want. It makes the job of the citizen much simpler as well. I mean, it's difficult to reckon with oh, well, these guys in Congress, and because of this isn't happening, or maybe
Mm,
is that the other thing? It's so much easier to be like, well, I don't like Obama, or
mm,
Trump is the worst. Like that's a much easier narrative for people to sort of absorb and move on with their day. So we focus so much on what the president wants, rather than where the sausage actually gets made, which is both in our national congresses, sorry, our federal level congresses, but vastly more importantly in the United States as well, on the state and local.
yeah.
And I think that's that. For the remainder of the conversation, yeah, I'd like to sort of move it back to, because that's what I find so impressive about Switzerland, is that the
And you do have a majority as well, is that right? That's why you have a sort of two-party system.
mm,
If you want to get elected, this is how I understand it, because in Switzerland you have that proportional election,
mhm,
and as a result, we do have, let me count, but I guess it's something like 12 different parties at the parliament.
mm,
Four main parties, which are also represented at the executive level. And this is sort of Swiss People's Party and the sort of so-called Socialist Party, the traditional, we call it liberals, but it would be the classic right-wing party, and
mhm.
the Christian Democratic Party. Those are the four main forces that we have at the parliament level and at the executive level. But then you have also at the parliament level the Greens, the Conservative, Bourgeois, Green Liberal, Evangelical Party, sort of.
There's actually a bourgeois party.
Yes, and it's
That's
called like
fantastic.
that.
That's fair. I would love to sign up for that party. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's so funny. That's so, and this was actually a sort of our small political drama a couple of years ago. It's because it's actually this merger from the Swiss People Party. So they split into two different factions, and one of them is now the bourgeois Parti Bourgeois. Yeah.
Hmm, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
We should probably address, it's coming up in the comments, and I think it's actually something I know very little about, but I think you know some more about the minaret law.
Oh, mineral law. Okay.
A number of years
Well,
back.
but this is kind of interesting. But first, let me explain you the referendum system, so the
Okay.
direct democracy that we have at the federal level, at least. At the cantonal level, it is even broader. We can even vote on tax legislation and stuff like that. So, but at the
Directly.
federal directly, yes,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. And but at the federal level, there are two ways to vote. It's, well, actually, to provoke a vote. First is you oppose a decision from the parliament. So if they want to adopt a new law, then you can oppose it if you collect 50,000 signatures, and you have a certain deadline to do so. Don't remember exactly how long it is, but it's quite reasonable. I mean, it's totally feasible if it's a controversial object. And then you have what we call the People's Initiative, which means
Mhm.
you can propose a modification of the Constitution. And for this, you need 100,000 signatures. So this is another thing very interesting, actually. We have a very flexible Constitution. We do not have that sacralized Constitution as you know it in the US. This is something actually we always modify it, I would say virtually each year, because we vote four times a year.
4 times a year.
Yeah, 4 times a year. And on different topics. And when I say 4 times a year, it's several objects for each of this vote.
So that's 4 times countrywide, or 4 times in Geneva?
4 times countrywide, but they sort of gather all the objects together. So most of the time you vote on federal objects, cantonal objects, and sometimes even on municipality objects. But you vote it at the same time, but just to make it more convenient, you know. So yes, so I was saying you have these two options: either you oppose a federal law or you suggest a modification of the Constitution. We have rejected and for me it's a shame, but I understand it can be kind of complicated to propose a new legislation as such. But I'm not going to go into the technicalities of it. But,
that would take a lot of time and probably actually bore people. But
well,
to go back to
these are the two options we have. And if you go to the minarets ban that we had, it was a people's initiative. So between 7 Swiss citizens together, they drafted a piece of legislation. They went to the Chancellerie, I don't know how you call that, sort of the administration. They say, okay, we would like to collect signature on that object. Well, fair enough, try it. And they made it to the 100,000 signatures. So there were a mandatory vote on that object. And so we had to decide on it. And this was part of the four vote sessions, so to speak, that we have each year. And so we adopted it.
So that's countrywide. You're not allowed.
That was countrywide, and that was a modification of the constitution. So I don't know if you understand what it means. We have banned the minarets at the constitutional level.
Okay, wow. I thought it was just a canton. That's
no. So this was something relatively huge if you consider the symbolic. For me, it's actually something deeply minor if you look at the real effects for what it is, if you take it for what it is. Because basically it's a building regulation. It's something that we rule at the municipal level, not even at the cantonal level. If you want to oppose a minaret, most of the time you deal with it in your own municipality. You don't even decide it at the cantonal level. So for me, it's really an outer space object that we decide to put into the constitution. But well, it was a symbol, of course, and it was a very interesting indicator of this problem that we face now with Islamism, or let's say, well, perceived issue that we have with Islamism.
Despite the interest of the comments, I don't think we'll get into that today.
No, but you wrote a book on that, and this is an interesting. I'll mention it because it is interesting as well to understand Islam in Switzerland. Because there are several factors that make it slightly different from other countries. First of all, the first population that we have that is Muslim comes from the Balkan countries. Okay, so
refugees from the Balkan Wars, or
yes, and so they are white people. Which makes it a little bit more easy to integrate them in the population, because I'm maybe not going to be able to explain it fully right now, but in Islam you have that culture of homogeneity. It means that you should only marry with your This is supposedly you stay within the family. It's better if you marry a Muslim or not. So this rule, if you have a racial distinction in addition to that cultural distinctions, things even harder then for the integration of that population. But we did not have that in Switzerland due to the fact that actually the Muslim population that we have is basically white. So there is less resistance within the community to prevent, for instance, the women from marrying to Swiss citizens. And this is the key, actually. If you want to integrate the population in any country in the world, just get the woman.
Intermarriage.
Then the men follow, Then the men follow.
Well, I also think Balkan, sort of Bosnian Muslims were tradition. I've been reading a lot recently about sort of you'd have all these Arab jihadists who would come to Bosnia during the war and would be like, "Who are these people?" Because the sort of Islam is traditionally practiced in the Balkans was very different from the sort of more traditional Saudi version that the world seems to see as the only thing that Islam is.
But this problem we do face in Switzerland, actually, because when we had that vote on minarets, I was thinking, but okay, let's imagine for a second that Islam is a problem for our culture.
Mm-hmm.
It can be somehow, okay? Let's admit that for a second. Admitting this.
Yes, okay. I would disagree, but let's imagine.
Yeah. Let's imagine this.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing you have to do, and this is only the one thing you have to do, is to get rid of foreign money. That's
Mm-hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm.
Which is financing those location for prayer.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only thing you have to do. If you prevent Saudi Arabia from financing the mosques that we have here in Switzerland, deal done. I mean, you have no more foreign influence, and then you can create another legal. You can actually not even create another one. You can just let another Islamic legal culture emerge. Because
I'm a tremendous fan of. I think Austria has taken steps in that direction. France is looking to take steps in that direction. It's the problem is not Islam as such. The problem is the fact that Saudi Arabia is building the mosques in Belgium, in France, in Germany. That is the problem. And if you actually allow the Muslim populations in a country to be independent of that influence, then the problem with radicalization, I believe, could
because you have other legal cultures within Islam, and they already exist, and you just have to leave them some space and some space to develop actually again, because they exist in the history. If you go back, well, you know that talk, but if we go back to the Ottoman Empire, for instance, I mean, what for in Islam is that in comparison to Saudi Arabia? I mean, it was much more tolerant than Europe at that time. But when I say much more, it means even the states was financing the building of churches.
Mm-hmm.
So could you imagine that in the Catholic Europe back in that at that time? It was unbelievable, totally unbelievable.
Well, I think actually Germany still doesn't Germany still collect taxes for churches?
In Switzerland, we do have that as well, actually.
Oh, interesting.
But this is something you can deduce it from your taxation. You can decide to pay to your religion if you want to. But this is ruled at the continental level. And for instance, they were discussing that. I'm not sure whether it is right or not, but they were discussing that to extend it to Islam in Canton Zurich. So you could also finance the local Muslim community with your taxation. I think that's an system in Zurich, but I don't know whether they've done that or not.
Yeah, I think that's because I think they're having that issue in France specifically. They're like, oh no, I don't want to get into the weeds on that but yeah, I think that's a concern. Whereas there's all these established pathways through which you can or cannot support a Christian faith community in European countries through your taxes. It's not as well established for a mosque, and I think the concern in France is that they have to, before they can fully shut down the foreign sponsoring, they have to figure out another funding stream for Islamic communities, which is, I think, quite interesting.
I'll just go to that question about the scarf and head wrap thing, whether a full face cover is allowed or not. And so this is something which is, but we do have pragmatic policies in Switzerland. So at the end of the day, you have to wonder for what good it is. So you're not supposed to cover your face in the sense that someone should be able to recognize you. So if a policeman comes to you, you have to remove that to be identified. But this is not a general rule we do have at the federal level. And here we go back to federalism. But I really don't want it to be at the federal level. Then if the cantons want to do something on this, honestly, I don't care. I don't see what it brings on the table, whether or not it is of any relevance. But if a canton decides to do so, they can. I think Ticino, so the Italian-speaking canton of Switzerland, did that. So this is unallowed in that canton. But for instance, in Geneva, we will never do that because we do have all the Saudi money, and they come for cantonal cantonal, how do you call that, festival here in Geneva, and they spend lots of money, so we're not going to do that any day soon in the future, I can tell you. Those populations are so paradoxical, but this is a totally different topic. I mean, seriously, it makes no sense. I mean.
So I think with the minaret issue, obviously it's not something that I'm a big fan of, but I think that this comes under a heading that a lot of things should. Like, well, that's democracy, man. Sometimes things get voted for that you don't agree with. And,
exactly. Yeah. And I have no problem with it.
Yeah.
As long as it's not threatening my fundamental liberties, I think it's fine for me. We can go in a direction or another, but I believe really deeply that as long as the core values, meaning really your individual rights, are not reached, I can perfectly adjust to opposing decisions, so to speak.
I want to go back. So you said that there are 4 elections a year in Switzerland. Do you have?
It's not election; it's vote. Huh? It's a difference. It's vote, not election. Electing someone. It's 4 vote process a year.
Yeah.
That means 4 times a year we vote on several objects.
Thank you. Thank you for
it's a piece of legislation. Yeah.
Thank you for the correction. But there are 4 votes a year. So what's the engagement like on that? I mean, do 10% of the people show up 4 times a year?
I would say half of the population.
A full 50% shows up 4 times a year to vote. That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, sometimes a little bit lower. Most of the time, it's a little bit less than that. But it's around it. Yeah.
And to even participate in these votes, because they're on questions of, as you said, civil law, maybe taxation. I mean, you have to invest time in figuring out what you're voting on, right?
Yes, sure. So you do have voting materials that comes with the vote, and you have certain rules to the one that actually make that materials have to follow certain rules. So it has to be as objectified as possible, and sometimes you can even contest it before the court if you believe that the materials brought with the vote materials is actually biased.
So Richard Baker points out that voting is done by mail typically.
What is with mail?
You can do it through the mail system, through post.
Yes, you can do it. But absolutely. This was for me unbelievable, because I'm also a French citizen. I got the nationality. I don't really feel French at all, but it's just I got the nationality, and I tried to vote for the presidential election. It was so interesting for me to just have to go to a vote location. This was something totally unknown to me. I mean, I've done that a couple of times in Switzerland, but the fact that you have to do that and you're not able to vote by mail, it was something totally I could not understand it. But that makes things easier. I don't know. For me, it's a very good process. I don't know what to say about that. Yeah, you can vote by mail. Yeah. So you mentioned the different objects we vote on, but for sure, sometimes it depends. Sometimes you have some more burning topics than others. Huh? For instance, we had a very interesting topic last time was the energy legislation. So we basically adopted a new law for the energy with a plan going to 2050. So we decided actually to exit nuclear energy and nuclear power in Switzerland. So this was sort of a big thing. And if I'm correct, I think the participation rate was a little bit higher than usual. But yes, but then you read, you inform, you discuss. There is something else very important, of course. If you go in the streets, then you will find some people that will try to convince you. They will be behind their little desk and be in favor of one side or the other and try to convince you whether it's or not. So we have to discuss. So you have a public discussion on those things.
On the street. It just amazes me that there's that level of knowledge, and I think that comes from the fact that, as you pointed out, that the politics aren't about personality to the extent that they are in the United
Absolutely.
States.
Oh, and
I think that's extraordinary.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something, another interesting thing, for instance, is the education system is at the cantonal level as well. So what stands in the program is actually decided at the cantonal level. You have guidelines at the federal level, but even universities actually are organized at the cantonal level as well. So if you think about a so small country as Switzerland, thinking that each 26 cantons can decide their own education, this is something kind of very interesting, I think, as well. And I believe, yes, I believe having those 4 vote sessions a year raise the level of education in general as well. Because when you discuss on this topic, and everybody is equal, because each one has a vote. So if I'm a lawyer talking to, I don't know, mechanicians, I mean, we weight we have the same weight on the on the balance at the end. So yeah, so then you can freely discuss these topics, and through discussion, then you learn for sure.
No, I think that's
lots of different things, and even and this is what I think also interesting is sometimes most of the people's initiatives fail in popular vote. Most of them they do, but at the same time it's interesting because then we have a topic to discuss and a certain aspect of how do we conceive society together. So for instance, we had an initiative on having 1/12 income, so meaning that you could not be paid more within a company than 12 times as much as the lowest payroll in the company. So this was a suggestion from the left, and they say for sure, but at the same time it's very interesting discussing the topic, you know, and what it means, and inequality, and all those lateral topics that go with it.
Fascinating. I think with next week's programming, if I can track down the guy I wanted to talk, we'll be talking about local politics in the United States, and I think it's fascinating to me that you have people showing up 4 times a year to vote on these local issues, and I really appreciate that about Switzerland. Just that the local politics are so important in the United States. I mean, people. When it's not a national election, people just don't show up, which is really unfortunate. Because, and I think what is acknowledged more in Switzerland than in the United States is the fact that your lives are decided locally. You know, what happens with your roads, your schools, your local tax policy. That's all decided locally. And a president is going to make 1 or 2 decisions in 4 years that's going to affect your life, whereas your local board of education, your local city council is going to make decisions every day that affect your life. And I really appreciate that Switzerland has an appreciation for that, and so I think we should.
To give you a very interesting example of the proximity of power that we have in Switzerland. So imagine this: I've founded this association, Service Citoyen. I can talk a little bit about that because I think this is another interesting aspect of Switzerland and very, very important on the political level. But so basically, I founded this association, and the purpose of it is basically, so we do have that mandatory military duty in Switzerland. As I mentioned, I've done that myself. Found it very interesting. I've learned lots of things. And then if you are but actually, and this is only for male first, huh? So only male have that duty in Switzerland. But then if you enter the military, you can decide to do a civil duty instead. because for whatever. Now you don't need to give reasons for it any longer, but in the past you had to. And basically, a civil duty is just you get engaged in some task of public interest, or considered like that. So it can be in the agriculture, it can be in social work, it can be lots of different things like that. Yeah?
So you can decide whether you want to go into the military or whether you want to do more.
But this is the problem, actually. You cannot decide this as such, because you have to do the military, and if you are accepted in the military, because you can, if you really want to play dumb, then you can. Especially that now we have the need for less recruits than we had in the past. We have a smaller army than we had, so there is not necessarily a place for everyone to fulfill its duty. But if you join the military, then you can decide actually to swap it and to do civil duty instead of doing your military service. But it's longer. It's almost now it's double the time of doing your military service. But then it's a little bit more flexible, and you do honestly more meaningful stuff. But you can imagine this. But I'm really not anti-army. Seriously, I do believe it's very important to have armed forces and such. But what I would like with my association to do is basically to have the free choice to decide right from the start whether you want to do a civil duty or a military duty, and to extend the obligation to serve to the women as well. So each Swiss citizen would have to do a service of public interest, if you want, and then you decide whether you want to do that in the military or you want to do that in a recognized task of public interest. That will be my idea. I lost track.
I'm getting a little in the weeds on the live chat. Unfortunately, I'm losing track as well. But you worked on.
Oh yes, and I was talking about the proximity of the power. Yes. And so with that association, and we are like something like 20 members, so it's rather small. I wrote a letter to the chief of the commander-in-chief of the army in Switzerland. I got an answer back, signed by his hand. I wrote a letter to one of our 7 prime ministers. I got a letter back, wrote by his hand.
Amazing.
Can you believe it? And then we sent the documents that we have written and about our project while we had a discussion on the topic of the duty to serve at the parliament. So we sent the documentation that we have produced to the group that was in charge of it at the parliament, to the commission that was in charge of it at the parliament, and we received not only an answer, but I had a personal meeting with one member of the parliament, which was actually leading that object and the discussion around that object, and wrote a report on what they think about this issue, on what changes could be made to the duty to serve in Switzerland. So he received me, and we discussed, and he explained to me what was their lines, what they disagree with, what were the disagreements with us, and stuff like that.
Oh, so he responded to you in detail.
He met me in person.
Amazing.
So this is something totally unbelievable if you think about it. And this is what I love actually about our government, is the feeling of proximity that you have, because you really have that feeling actually that we are citizens of the same country. It's not like a top-down approach. It's just like, I mean, you know better than me. It's just each of us has one vote at the end. You know, okay, he's a member of the parliament, so he decides on the much more objects than I do, but I do decide as well. And yeah, so there is a real feeling of equality between the members of the Swiss society. This is how I perceive it. Yeah.
I think we should. I think we should probably head towards winding down. I've got a couple more things I want to address. Do you want to talk about Service Citoyen a bit? What your involvement is in that? What's the just what?
Yes, sure.
Briefly.
So one of the key of the system is we do not have professional politicians.
Mm-hmm.
We have very few professional politicians. This is, unfortunately, and this is really, really a shame, something that is slightly changing. In fact, we still have, theoretically the case, but we are getting more and more professional politicians.
And you don't like that?
I don't like that. I don't like that, and I think it's really a bad thing for the country, because then because the problem with professional politicians is they have only one task. They have only one job, is to communicate. This is the only thing that they need to be good at. They don't need anything else. If you want to get elected, the only thing you have to do is to communicate, to be a good speaker, good communicator, to know to make a buzz news and stuff like that. This is the only thing you have to do. So this is not, as such, a quality for a decision maker, because this is really the key. At the end, a politician, it will be a decision maker, and this is what should be relevant, in my opinion. But well, I'm getting a little bit off track here. But what I wanted to say is, so we have this militia principle. The militia principle is the fact that we have to go to the military. We have to go to be the representative of the people, and that can be anyone, and that should be anyone, actually. Okay. So if you go a little bit deeper into that, what it means deeply is each citizen has to get directly involved in public affairs, and this is not something that you will delegate to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would like to promote, and to what I call refresh, actually, is to make it broader, to have a stronger militia system, to renew it. And this is why I want each man and woman in the country to have that duty to serve and to decide in which field they should go. And I will go even further than one we have right now, but this is not part of the project itself. But this is what could come next, or should come next, is and then the civil duty would also cover, for instance, administrative tasks. Then why not directly working within the government or within the administrative bodies? You know, and I say that. Can you believe it? I mean, we ask the citizen of the country to do the toughest work on earth, meaning to take the arms, to fight, and to put your life on the line to defend your country. So please don't tell me we're not able to do some basic desk task or whatever you call it.
Interesting stuff. So to close, is there anyone else in the live chat who has a question about Switzerland? Rather than I mean, it's been an interesting conversation. We've talked about Trump. We've talked about Islam. We've talked about hanging specific Canadian politicians. But yeah, has anybody got any Switzerland questions? Oh, no, we've got Hillary Clinton now. Okay. I guess we don't have any Switzerland questions. To close out the conversation, please throw in a Switzerland conversation. We'll address it before the end. But my sort of question is, what elements of, how would a country set about setting up elements of the Swiss model? I mean, what elements are easiest to export? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think the militia system first. This is something very interesting because, especially in the US, I think you got rid of conscription. Is that how you call it in English as well? Yeah, conscription.
Yes.
The fact that you have to serve in the military. Yes.
Yeah, I guess we refer to it as the draft generally in the United States.
The draft. Okay.
Conscription is technically true. Yeah. and that is
Okay.
that I believe was done away with in either during or in the aftermath of Vietnam. Yeah.
Exactly. And this is, for me, a huge mistake.
Mm.
Because this is the reason why the Vietnam War has been so criticized. Because if you put the life of each children in every family of the country on the line to do a war, then you have much more popular reaction than when it is something that is paid for to do the job. Because you have to give justifications. Much stronger justification when you want to invade a country and explain me why my child should die for that war.
Well, so that actually the draft and conscription was part of the settled law at the time of the Vietnam War, and that's why it was so controversial. It's interesting now that it's a volunteer. You're exactly right, though, that now that it's a volunteer army, nobody really cares. And we can be at war in 7 countries.
Exactly.
Which
and
is
because this is the job. I mean, the people are paid for this, and so yeah. What's the matter with it? I mean, people don't feel concerned any longer. They're like, yeah, this is our army. We're strong. We pay for it. They watch movies and news on the topic. They feel strong about it, but they don't feel concerned. Whereas when it is your child, your child's life on the line is totally different. It's a totally different feeling, and so it gets much more concrete than this abstraction of having a professional army. So that will be one point.
I go back and forth on that, whether or not bringing back the draft would be a good thing. But yeah, all right. Your next point.
So then proportional election. That's another thing. To not so for instance, if you make, I don't know, but then you can decide. We have what we call the quorum, so you can decide you have to reach 3%, for instance, of the vote to get already elected in the parliament, which then leave the floor open for a lot of different smaller parties to come along and join the show.
We actually have some Switzerland questions now.
Yeah, cool.
How many refugees has Switzerland taken?
That's the funny part of it, actually. You know, we are the countries that pro rata is taking more refugees than any other countries in Europe.
Really?
Yeah, and we have the larger population pro rata as well. Foreign population pro rata as well.
Well,
well, there is another reason for that. Is it's tough to get the Swiss citizenship. So that's the counterbalance.
So that's why there's such a large foreign population. But you do take so Switzerland has taken a lot of Syrian refugees, for example, or.
Syrian refugees, honestly, I'm a bit disappointed that we have not taken that population and we choose to pick some population from other countries. Because honestly, I mean, Syria was a well-educated country, so I believe like Angela Merkel made actually a good bet on taking those refugees to meet quotas, so to speak.
Yeah,
and not other population, because of course, you know, they were a little bit more educated and fit to be integrated than maybe other population.
Well, yes, the populations that Europe is getting, we unfortunately in the United States require everybody to who comes to the U.S. to spend 2 years in a refugee camp before we'll let them in. So anybody who actually has opportunities or skills goes to Europe.
Yeah.
And we don't.
But no, to answer the question, no, we did not have a massive arrival of Syrian refugees in Switzerland. But
just every year you take more refugees than anybody else does proportionally.
Yes, if I'm correct. This is the last figures I remember. But
here's a question. What does Richard Baker asks? What does Quentin think of Swiss Germans and the German language?
That's very interesting. So as I pointed out, actually, I believe Switzerland is a Germanic country, first of all. And without Swiss German and the German-speaking culture, this country would not exist, definitely.
Interesting.
Definitely. And this is crucial to preserve that culture. They do that quite well. We do have our differences for sure, and this is also an enrichment, I believe, to have different cultures that have to cooperate. But yes, so my answer would be Switzerland is first and foremost a Germanic country.
Oh,
so I do appreciate very much having Swiss German in Switzerland, and I would wish to have more of them in Geneva to take care of public affairs in here.
Oh, you're going to cause yourself problems. That can't be a popular view in Geneva.
Well, but yes and no. I don't know. It is the feeling I have is in Geneva is not so much that they don't like Swiss Germans. They just they barely know them. That's all. That's all.
Interesting. Another question from Richard Baker. Much as I love my country, I know it's not perfect. What does Quentin think should be improved?
Your country meaning Switzerland, I guess. Meaning Switzerland.
Yes. What can be improved about Switzerland?
Well, first of all, there is my political project with having this reformed duty to serve. But this is one point. Another thing, honestly, I would have a random election for parliament. I don't believe we need to elect representative any longer, actually, due to the fact that I mentioned before, is at the end, a good politician is simply someone that is good at communicating, and this is not the skill that we're looking for when we form a parliament. So I believe we basically should just have some random people, random Swiss citizens for sure, but in the chambers, and so that would be one thing, which would impact a lot of different aspects. For instance, lobbies as well, because we have strong lobbies in Switzerland, especially the insurance industry, for sure. As I mentioned, this is one of the problems we have is the healthcare system. And one of the reasons why it's problematic is because we have strong lobbies in the parliament. To give you a simple example, the two presidents of the two chambers, both they are directly affiliated with an insurance company. So it makes it a little bit tough to go in another direction than with the one we have, and which is really suboptimal and too expensive.
This is a great question from DJ/UK, and I think probably a good one to close on. Switzerland regularly makes the top of the happiness index. What's its secret?
Maybe boredom, as I mentioned at the beginning. The fact that it's a boring political country, honestly. The fact that we don't have fancy politicians and colorful debates of meaningless topics, and it's very pragmatic. Wealth is definitely a factor. The water as our primary resource is definitely something that has to be taken into consideration. I believe localism as well. The fact that we feel in charge of our destiny, of our collective decisions. This is something very, very important. Very, very important. The fact that you feel concerned about what's going on, and you feel that you have the power to do something here. And this is actually a fact. This is not just a feeling, as I mentioned. 7 citizens together, they collect 100,000 signatures, and they can change they can propose a change of constitution. So this is something huge if you think about it. That power that we have. Probably another thing we haven't discussed, but the hardworking culture we have, due probably to the strong influence of Protestantism in Switzerland. So the relation towards money that goes with it, meaning that we understand that money is a means and not some kind of demonic object that corrupts people or whatever. But it's just a means. That's it.
I think I really just to go back to what you said, and I think that's probably a good place to close. I really just the fact that the people in Switzerland know that they have control of their system and their
Absolutely.
government, and that I think that's extraordinarily important. And what's frustrating to me is that these institutions exist, certainly in the United States, and to another extent, to different extents throughout Europe, and it's just that people don't use them. People don't use these institutions.
But you need a culture to go along, and I think the other factor is simply that you have a concentration of power in other hands in other countries. For instance, in the U.S., for me, I would call it a corporate democracy. I mean, the multinational corporations have so much power over the course of public affairs that at the end, the propaganda they make, the distraction they create, I would even say the entertainment they produce, distract people from taking care of themselves.
I think there's probably something to that, but
and we're going back to boredom. Actually, we're going back to boredom again.
Yeah. And its importance.
And its importance, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, when you're bored, you do much more. But this is a rule for any individual. When you're bored, you do much more than when you are distracted all the time. You know that. This is a simple rule. So let's get bored of our politics in a way.
That is the lesson of the Swiss model. It's good. Boredom is good. Boredom is good. But yeah, boring politics in which the people engage. That's the crucial.
Absolutely.
Not
no, they should have the faculties to do so. That's boredom without any possible course of action doesn't make any sense. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're bored in a locked room, then what is there to do? You know. Yeah.
All right. Well, Quentin, this has been a great conversation. Thank you.
My pleasure. Any other questions that we haven't taken?
I think we sort of handled
something about the European Union, no?
Oh yes. Well, I think it was something about Switzerland. Can Switzerland take a broader leadership role in Europe? But I think
yeah.
But I think that's just sort of institutionally, structurally is a difficult thing.
Absolutely. But the only thing we could do is to let our culture be a little bit more understood by other people. I think this is all we can make.
Which is what we're trying to do here today.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. Yeah. But this is also the difficulty with it. Since we don't have anything fancy to offer, then you will probably not find it in the headlines of your newspapers. So how can you be informed of it if it's not by searching for yourself?
Very true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Quentin.
My pleasure.
If you're interested in Quentin's organization, Service Citoyen has a website. It's linked in the description. And thank you so much for joining us here for this More Freedom Foundation live programming. We're going to keep trying to do these events. Very grateful to everyone who jumped in on the live chat. It's been a lot of fun. And also, I'm in the middle of a fundraising push. Quentin is... as well as many participants of the live chat, are participants in my Patreon crowdfunding thing. I'm trying to get to the point by my 38th birthday, July 15th, 2017, get to the point where I'm making U.S. minimum wage. I'd like to make it above the poverty line for doing this channel. And I'd be grateful to anyone who'd consider chipping in. Thanks so much. And I guess with that, I'll say goodbye. Goodbye, Quentin.
Yeah. Goodbye. Talk to you soon. My pleasure.
Indeed.